what I really realized going through high school, I actually met someone and she had anxiety, and I had never seen anyone name it, and I had
Mhm.
never seen anyone talk about it, and I had never been explained to what a panic attack was until
Mm.
then, freshman year of high school.
This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Welcome to the first episode of Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. I'm Dr. Liz. I've been in the field of psychology for over 10 years and working as a relationship expert for a large portion of that time. Sometimes it can be really awkward and uncomfortable to talk about certain relationship topics, but it's my passion to normalize these topics because in spite of our differences, we as humans are a lot more similar than we realize. I'm so excited to get these relatable conversations started. My first guest is Nick Thompson from Love is Blind Season 2. Nick is an activist who also works as a software marketing executive and hosts his own podcast, Conversations with Nick Thompson. Nick is here today to talk about the power of self-discovery and how his therapy journey has truly transformed the way he looks at relationships. Hey, Nick. Thank you
Hello,
so
hello.
much for joining me today. I'm so excited for you to be here on my very first episode of Relatable. I'm grateful for you.
I'm excited to be here too. It's nice to see you again.
Yes, you as well. So when I was on your show recently, Conversations with Nick Thompson, we talked a lot about attachment theory. We talked a lot about relationships and really your experience, your healing journey, your experiences that you've been having. So today I really want to talk about like the power of self-discovery, because that was a pretty profound conversation that you and I had on yours about, the attachment theories and how that's
Mhm.
influenced your perspective of relationships. And so that's really where I want to go today. Um, Before we do that, tell us a little bit about, outside of the Love is Blind personality that we all know and love, who is Nick Thompson?
Oh, wow, we're hitting the ground running. Okay. Um, you know, I, I am very, very much a professionally, I work in marketing, and that's a big part of who I am. And then even, Love is Blind has become a part of who I am. But at the core, like I am a kid that grew up in the Midwest suburbs of Chicago. I grew up relatively lower middle class, and I like to spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can make the world a better place. I also spend a lot of time reflecting on myself and thinking about how I can become a better person, a better version of myself. And at the core, what I hope to do, especially having a little bit of a platform now, is really take the things that I'm learning day to day and really hopefully help other people apply them into their everyday life, because I get to do it on the grand stage of the public. And so, in some sense, I think some of these learnings are actually applicable to the everyday life, because you have to survive almost some of the scrutiny and some of the challenges of being in the public eye. And then additionally, I'm a dog dad. My little buddy's right down here. His name's Grayson. And I like to spend a lot of time, walking him, playing with him. It's a good way to keep me grounded. And ultimately, I am trying to use ideas to change myself, change the way I think, and then, of course, hopefully change the world one person at a time.
Yes, I love that. And that's such a huge part of what your podcast even is and why I was so drawn to being a part of that with you. It's really about these conversations. It's getting to know people at their core, and everyone is so similar, yet so like unique. And it's that really that contrast is a lot of what you do with the podcast of really getting to know people.
And that was the big point. So I've wanted to have a podcast for 10 years. I thought 10 years ago it was going to be about fantasy football because I was in my mid 20s, and that was what was important to me. It was fantasy football and sports and working and like figuring out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. But the point of this podcast was really for me to realize like there's a lot of stigmas, and they're around a lot of different topics. There's stigmas around mental health and wellness. There's stigmas around overall health, fitness. There's stigmas around holistic health. I'm a big proponent of holistic health. I do a lot of DIY projects myself. I just painted my wall, but specifically, like I make my own um, condiments, food, healthcare tools like toothpaste and lotion and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And ultimately, I wanted to give a space where people can talk about things that maybe they're not comfortable talking about, or maybe they have an expertise on that they can share. And then I can just play the role of sort of facilitating the everyday person who may wonder about these things and not have access to that information or that expertise. And then at the same time, we can then remove stigmas because we add humanity to people who may otherwise not be viewed or shown as human. And one
Yeah.
of the stories that I share all the time, and I may have even shared it with you at some point, is, I think about like homeless people, and they're invisible. They are invisible. People walk by them. They don't pay attention. I personally try to acknowledge every one of them, even if I don't have anything that I can give them or do for them, because they're human beings. And that's at the core what we all are. We are all human beings. So let's not let the media, let's not let stigmas divide us. Let's create spaces where we can talk about things that really, truly matter and listen to each other. And that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast. And I feel like that's a mission that aligns with my character and my values.
And I love that. And I think that's a big part of why you and I hit it off so quickly in the way that we did, because even with Relatable, that is such the foundation of what, when you're saying having these conversations that people are either uncomfortable talking about or are not likely to talk about, and bringing it down to that human level, that we are just all human and we all have struggles and we all have setbacks and these things that we don't talk about. And especially being in the social media era where everything is a highlight reel and everything is about how great everything is, there's not enough conversation that just normalizes the everyday struggle and the relational struggles and whatever, the mental health struggles, all of that. So I love how much our missions align, and I'm really grateful for you being here so we can talk more through that. I want to talk about your healing journey. So really specific to your healing journey through relationships. When you and I chatted last time, we had talked about, you made a decision at a certain point of like, I need to get in therapy. I need to start working through some things. And it's been quite the journey for you since then. Can you take us back to like that initial decision, whether you remember this moment or just this season of life? What led to you really deciding like, hey, I've got to figure something out here?
I grew up in a dynamic that was really not open to talking about your feelings. And that was not, and I struggle to find the right words because this is not a diss on my family. This is not a diss on my friends or anything like that. Things were different. I grew up in the 90s, and I just remember very much so. My parents separated when I was 5 years old, and I just started getting these feelings that I now know were depression. Back then, I thought there was something wrong with me. And then, as time went on, I would just have these like bouts of just incredibly hard times, and there was no reason for them. Like it wasn't, and there was some stress as a kid, and a broken family, being the oldest, having two sisters, feeling responsible for things that I didn't necessarily need to.
Yeah.
And what I really realized going through high school, I actually met someone who became my best friend all through high school and most of college. And she had anxiety, and I had never seen anyone name it. And I had never seen anyone talk about it. And I had never been explained to what a panic attack was until then, freshman year of high school.
Yeah.
And so growing up too, I went to a Catholic school all the way until high school. So high school opened up a whole lot of new worlds for me. But as I was going through high school and I was getting, I guess, like an understanding of, hey, you can talk about these things. I first started feeling, I think everyone in high school, but like I started getting like really long, drawn out bouts of depression. And so I think I was 20 or 21 years old the first time I sucked out therapy. And my goal was to really like name it. And I know that sounds silly now, but like just being able to go somewhere and have someone say, you feel this, you suffer from depression, that's okay. And I guess I was seeking to name it, because I feel like when you name something, you can then talk about it. But
Yeah.
if you don't name it, you're in this like ambiguous space where you're like, what is this? Why am I feeling this way? Should I feel this way? There isn't anything particularly wrong in my life. I'm doing this well, but like these feelings sat with me.
Mm.
And so I had gone, I think probably about 2 years then. And I honestly, I don't remember why I stopped, if I'm being honest. But I was on some, I tried different antidepressants, learned different coping mechanisms. And then, in my mid 20s, I didn't really have a therapist. I moved to Chicago. It was a new space. And then in 2016, I realized, like, God, these feelings have not gone away. Some of my coping mechanisms weren't working anymore. And so I literally, this is so silly because my life is very ironic, but I Googled and I found my therapist in 2016 that I still see to this day.
Mm.
And I found her on Google and on Psychology Today or some
Sure.
one of those websites.
Yeah.
And I just like got this feeling. I'm like, oh, she's going to be the one to help me. And so I started going. I've gone every week, every other week, sometimes multiple times a week, ever since then. So it's been about 6 years now.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, so many people can probably relate to those feelings. I know, like, even as you're talking, I could completely relate to, is probably middle school, early high school, that I really started to get these depressive symptoms. And
Mm,
because my family, that, as you're describing, we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about emotions unless they're happy ones. And so there just was no space to have those conversations. And so, I mean, similarly, it took me well into adulthood for me to even recognize what was going on, even with this career in mental health, right? I'm like, me depressed, what? But having that realization, and I love how you say that, because naming it's now no longer this vague, ambiguous, like, what's wrong with
right.
me. It's like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and millions of people experience the same thing.
And it's okay. It's okay to
Absolutely.
have that. And I
Yeah.
felt growing up, and a little, literally, like I actually thought about this today. Growing up, growing up Catholic, going to a Catholic school, and things are probably different now. I'm no longer consider myself Catholic, but there were certain things you didn't do. You would and would not say. And for that environment, it was very challenging to actually know how to properly express myself. When you're
Mm.
a kid or a teenager, you don't know anyway. So you don't, and even in the best case
Yeah.
scenario, you have no idea what you're doing. So I felt, like it kind of set me back a little bit in the comfort level on talking about it. But to your point, it's not, it's not even like our parents or our family's fault. Like that was society was telling you,
Sure.
you can't do this, like, or you can't talk about this. And so from my perspective, I feel like there's a lot of people that grew up that way. And listen, it's a journey. Like I'm forcing myself to talk about it a lot more now than I ever have before, because I know that I wish I had someone I that was comfortable talking about it when I was young, like my friend from high school.
Yeah, and like you're saying that, you saying as kids we didn't know how to talk about it anyway, but let's compound that really with, then we didn't even have role models for that, because
Exactly.
obviously our caregivers didn't either, and so they didn't have a template either, and so that has just this intergenerational trauma that's come along
Hmm.
with shaming emotions and shaming experiences outside of pleasant. You're absolutely right that it has been something passed down, but
Hmm.
that didn't make it any easier on any of us, right? It's still the impact of it was still just as detrimental. At what point did your mental health journey switch, and maybe it didn't fully, but switch to more relationship focus? So even when you and I were talking about attachment theory and stuff, when did all of that start to come to light for you?
So I actually had the trigger for me to go back to therapy, 6 years ago was actually a struggling relationship. And I knew that my depression was impacting that relationship. And I had never told anyone. about it. I kept it in. You know, from friends, from family, like I kept it in. I didn't really tell anyone. And what my coping mechanism, which I knew was unhealthy, was I would just disappear when I was depressed. I wouldn't
Mm.
respond to texts. I wouldn't make plans. I'd be wishy-washy if I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. And, you know, that became my coping mechanism. So there would be times when I would spend, you know, an entire weekend, you know, in bed essentially. And, you know, I knew that there's things that go with that sort of depression, and it's a lack of will to do anything. Everything feels like it's the biggest task in the world. You know, your intimacy goes down as well, which
Yeah.
I don't think we talk enough about that, especially for men in this culture. But when I'm depressed, like the last thing I want to do is have a physical relationship with anyone,
Right.
whether I'm single or whether I'm in a committed relationship or even married. It's a difficult thing to talk about because there
Hmm.
is so much society around it. And I think we do need to talk more about that. But
Yeah.
these were impacting the relationship. And there were other things too. Like it wasn't just that, but I was like, this is an opportunity for me to try again. And to be, you know, completely transparent, I got a little turned off and frustrated initially too. And this wasn't why I stopped. I stopped. I don't even remember why I stopped, but like I tried so many medications and nothing was working, and they were all making me feel not like myself. And so I really wanted to be like, you know, I don't think medication is going to work for me. I have to put structure in place. Um, I have to learn best practice, and also ultimately, like I need to be comfortable with myself because if I'm comfortable and calm and I have inner peace with myself, I don't have to worry about what other people think about me. I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm doing the right thing, or if people are going to say this, or if I don't come to this or do this, are they going to think that, or God forbid someone find out that I get depressed. Like those were the feelings that I was having, and it was almost creating like an anxiety that,
Yeah.
you know, I realized I had the whole time. So getting myself into therapy and going for relationship, I actually thought I was going for a relationship, but I was really going for self care,
Mm.
and it eventually became that. Where I was like, hey, I'm not doing the things I need to do in my life to make sure that I feel good and feel like myself.
Right. Right. And let's just take a second to normalize all of that, because what you just said is so important, that when somebody is experiencing mental health concerns, and I talk about this occasionally on my Instagram, that it really does influence the relational dynamic. This is not, when somebody is depressed, when they're anxious, it's not something that only they go through. It often
Mm,
results in maybe them creating unnecessary conflict with their partner, or as you're saying, withdrawing from their partner, and lower sex drive. And I think that for both men and women, and I think that that is so important as well, because that physical intimacy piece is really important part of connection. And so for individuals like you're describing, who maybe don't talk openly about, I'm experiencing anxiety or depression, I just don't want to have sex with you, that is so much rejection for the partner on the receiving end of that. And then
mhm.
so much shame, especially as you're saying with the societal messages, so much shame for a man, that he feels like, what's wrong with me that I don't want to have sex? I mean, that there's so many mixed messages that go on with that. And so I love that you're pointing all of that out, that mental health is not specific to the individual, but it really does influence the whole relationship.
I completely agree, and I learned, I learned that a lot reflecting back on other things that had happened in my life,
Mm.
to like even realize, oh my God, that is a thing. Like that's something I need to talk about and figure out.
Right. Did you guys do couples counseling at that time, or were you mostly individual working on
It
relationships?
was, yeah, it was individual at that time. I'd actually not done, had I done? No, I had not done couples counseling at all until getting married.
Okay. And are you open to talking about your attachment style and like
Yeah,
how that shows up
absolutely.
for you?
This
And
is, I think I told you a couple weeks ago, it's all happening in real time. But,
yeah.
you know, the funny thing is, I went into my therapist's office and I was like, hey, like, I think I'm the avoidant attachment style.
Mm.
And I'm like, do you know about attachment styles? And she's like, I pulled out a book and told you to look this up like 3 years ago. And you came back and you said, no, that's not me.
You
Like,
weren't ready yet.
I wasn't, no, I really
Yeah.
wasn't ready. And
Yeah.
so, it's interesting to, and again, like, I think that's the sign of a good therapist too. The amount of times she's like, when you're ready, this is
Yeah.
something we need to talk about.
She meets you where you're at, and that is a
Exactly.
powerful thing. So, avoidant attachment, how does that show up for you? What are some of the behaviors that come along with being avoidant?
That's a great question. So I consider myself avoidant attachment style from my own research, from my, few weeks of casual, once in a while conversations with my therapist. And the way that this shows up, and by the way, it doesn't just show up in your partner relationships, it shows up with your family, it shows up with your friends, and like realizing all of this stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. Like this even goes back to when I'm depressed and I don't want to see my friends. Why don't I want to see them? Because I don't want to confront them with the thing that I'm going through, because
Mm,
I want to avoid it.
yeah.
Right. And so it's like very weird the way you see that, the way that they show up. But basically, for me, when there's a conflict that arises, it's really hard for me, especially if I don't see it coming. It's very hard for me, or if it's something I don't want to talk about, it's hard for me to like sit there in that moment and talk about it. So I want to avoid it. I want to leave. I want to go take a walk. I want to think about it. And I want to really formulate my reaction to it before I just am reactive, because I used to be much more reactive.
Mm,
And I've learned to like stop, think, take a walk, don't pay attention to your phone, don't be distracted, just give yourself that time to process. So when you're in a relationship, or a friendship or with family, for me, I want to avoid the conflict. I don't want to have the conversation. Especially don't want to have it if it's unexpected. And I avoid it. Like I want to avoid it, and that's difficult, especially depending on the attachment style that you're connected with.
yes, and beautiful point. And I was going to say, how do you see this impacting? And obviously, everyone you interact with has different attachment styles. How do you see this often influencing, though, your partners historically? When you do withdraw, what do you usually, maybe, what waves does that create? How does it further exacerbate whatever's going on with that?
Yeah, I think it's of course going to depend on the partner. So I could, when I think back, across, I've had, I I have had long relationships. So there's like different levels of this, but I think like one of the things that happens, is that I've learned to do through therapy, is to communicate that I need some time, and
Mm,
that's okay. And
yeah.
so to be like, I'm not ready to engage in this right now. But I will say that the other thing that, I've noticed when I reflect upon this, and again, this is all very fresh in the last maybe 4 to 6 weeks. I've kind of like clicked on this. I would get very defensive, and I would leave, or I would walk away, or I'd say I'm not talking about this anymore.
Mm,
And in the time, I was thinking to myself, this is a way to preserve and protect myself. But now I'm aware of it, so I try to ask for the time. So it
okay.
depends. It depends on the relationship, right? Like, but I'm
Mhm.
more than comfortable saying I'm not comfortable talking about this right now. Can we talk later? Or I need to formulate my thoughts on this. Can I have some time?
Right. And that offer to come back, or that even reassurance that you'll be back, can make all the difference for the often anxious partner who's going to be on the opposite side of the avoidant. That's generally how that turns out. And so for an anxious individual, even wherever they fall in the continuum of anxious, but if they're in a relationship with an avoidant and the avoidant removes themselves from the relationship or from the situation, that triggers rejection,
Hmm.
abandonment, all those things that often causes then that other individual maybe to get bigger, louder, maybe to start to follow you, which is the exact opposite of what you need. I mean, and that really
And you're
sets
doing to be
sets it off.
fair, you're doing the exact opposite of what they need, which is why,
Exactly.
like, I wish I had this knowledge
Yeah.
further than a few weeks, because
Yeah.
I feel like if you understand this, you can really talk it through and give the reassurance to the anxious partner. The anxious partner can understand that you just need time, and it's not, that's not it, you're coming back, to your point.
Right. Yeah. And that is one of the most powerful things that really you can say is that I will be back. And really what you're talking about, I just want to explain real quick for listeners that really the attachment theory and the relational programming and how that goes hand in hand. And so what you're describing is that the way that you show up when you're in a threat state, when you're faced with something uncomfortable, is by withdrawing and avoiding it. And that comes from what you learned through childhood, the way that you kept yourself safe, and that behavior carries with you until you have awareness around it, which you are beautifully doing now, and can start to shift that. But then starting to shift it, like you're saying, is something as little but as powerful as reassuring I will be back, or reassuring like I need a second to think about that before we go any further. And it sounds like that's really the work that you're doing, is not only working to change your attachment style towards secure, but you're trying to be a lot more sensitive to your future partners, whatever that looks like for them as well.
That's exactly right. And this is not like, I think so, naming it, step one, understanding it, step two, understanding your role in it, probably step three,
Yeah.
step four, identifying how you need to communicate it, and then step five, like moving yourself into maybe secure, right?
Yeah.
So it isn't easy. Like I've identified it, I've named it, and I'm like I should probably behave in this way. So applying it consistently takes time. And so I don't know, in my next relationship, how much I'll be able to apply, but I feel like it'll be better than it's been before.
And you'll practice. And that's what I tell my clients all the time is I have all the knowledge in the world and I still struggle. I still struggle with
Mm.
attachment. I still struggle with how I show up when I'm feeling my deepest fears, when there's this threat in front of me. And so, yes, let's really normalize that you will likely experience that. But the difference is, and one of the most profound things is that you have awareness around it. And when I talk with clients about being aware of red flags in their current or future relationships, red flags can and will exist, but does that other
Mhm.
person have awareness around their own red flags? Are they demonstrating intentional efforts towards change, which is exactly what you're doing? And that makes it a lot easier. It maybe not in the moment, but it makes the big picture a lot easier to be like, but he's aware of it and he's trying and he's able to come
Mhm.
back and acknowledge what went wrong, why, and how he's going to do it differently in the future. That is a complete relationships will never be perfect. That is a complete game changer.
I hope so. I think you're right, and even in other areas, right? It's like the application is the hard part. That's the practice, right? You can sit, I'll use a football analogy here. You can sit there and you can game plan all day, but when you get out there on the field, if you didn't practice, your game plan doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. So tell me what have been like a couple of your biggest struggles in this process of self-discovery, but then also trying to practice these new behaviors? Where have you found it most difficult?
So I always say everyone's a work in progress, myself included. When I try to think about the things that I've learned and share the things that I've learned and what's been difficult, it's all difficult. Like you spend most of your life, I feel like, in situations that make you uncomfortable and that challenge your sense of self, that challenge your belief system, that challenge the behaviors that you've developed over time. And for me, the hardest thing is remembering and applying the things that I've learned in the moment when they're happening.
Mm,
Because I did used to be very reactive. I used to have a temper that would, and never like violent, like I've never hit anyone in my life. I've been punched in the face, but I didn't do anything back. But I used to kind of get frustrated very quickly and very explosive, and that was kind of again, not to cut the fam. We're all very close, but like it was at times explosive growing up.
yeah.
Being a teenager, living with my mom and two sisters most of the time, and then my dad the other times, and all the stuff that we had going on family wise. It was hard. And I actually was talking to my mom about this a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling her, I'm like, I've worked so hard to like be calm
Mm,
after growing up the way that we did. And like, I don't ever want to lose that. And there's times where I feel like it starts to slip away when I let go of my self-care regimen, when I don't keep the boundaries that I know are so important to my well-being and the structure that I've spent so many years putting in place to make sure that I'm not like that anymore.
mm.
So I think, the consistency is the hardest thing, because if you put all the work in and you get everything where you want it, it's still possible that you let it all go, and that's on you. That's on.
Yeah.
This is not always the most popular thing, but like, we're responsible for our own triggers. Like, we can't expect other people to adjust because I get angry when someone says this, or I'm avoidant when someone does that. Like, I have to own that and know how to react and behave in the moment. And that's the hardest thing to do, especially, having come from a different background and having to have learned these skills. I have to keep practicing them or they slip.
Yeah, I mean, and that emotional regulation piece, like you're saying, a lot of us were not taught how to regulate emotions. A lot of us were actually sent away for big emotions, which I work a
Hmm.
lot with my clients on, that crying or tantrums. And that is really culturally what we do. That is, I mean, the timeout for a child, that is what that, sending them away for their big emotions. And so because of
Hmm.
that, we don't learn how to work through them. We just uh, either avoid or we get explosive or whatever that looks like. But it sounds like you figured out some ways that to regulate your nervous system so that maybe in those moments when there is an opportunity for you to be reactive, you're able to choose a different path.
I definitely try. I'm not perfect. It doesn't always work.
Sure.
One thing I want to ask you about that. So this is interesting to me because, like, one of the ways that I self-regulate is I step away, which is
Mhm.
also feeding into the avoidant attachment style. So
Yeah.
like, how do you self preserve in a sense, but then also, respect your partner and your own attachment style so that you can not kind of get like caught up. Because if I'm like,
Right.
if I'm in a conversation that's making me uncomfortable, or a conflict, I want to leave. But also, for me to calm myself and not be reactive, like, I need to take a step back.
Yeah, which actually is exactly what I encourage people to do because there's nothing wrong with that. When you are activated in that way, your amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, it it reacts. And so it's the fight or flight response is happening. You probably feel like the discomfort in your stomach, in your chest, in your throat. All of that is your body's being flooded with these biochemicals, with adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, everything you need to protect yourself. And
Mhm.
so for someone especially who you're trying not to be reactive, so you're like, okay, there is a shit ton of chaos going on in my body that I don't know what to do with, so I need to remove myself. That is okay because that is how, by removing yourself from the threat, you give yourself the opportunity for your prefrontal cortex to come back online and you can start thinking logically. And you probably notice that when you remove yourself, probably within a few minutes, depending on how big it is, you can
Mhm.
feel the hormones and all of the biochemicals dissipating. But the biggest thing goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's having that, it's letting your partner know that you'll be back. But even beyond that, it's sometimes setting these ground rules prior to even going into this. So they know, like, your partner's very aware of this is what I need. And I can completely relate to that. Like, space is exactly what I need when I'm feeling reactive. So
Mhm.
if when I'm in a relationship, that conversation is had that this is how what I need in order to calm down. And so you
Mhm.
give them the disclaimer in advance and then you come back. But the other piece of that is coming back is like not coming back 2 weeks later, right? Coming back, like,
Right.
there's an established, when you're laying out the ground rules, there's usually an established, let's come
Timeline.
back together in 20 minutes. If we're not ready, we'll at least touch base and then do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But what you're
I've
doing,
learned, I learned that too. Yeah,
yeah.
that's another one I will say. Like, in the moment, it's very, very hard to regulate yourself to be like, I need a half an hour. And I can think back to one relationship that I had where I went on a half an hour walk, and like, she was upset. And in retrospect, like she had every right to be upset. I literally, it's just like, I'm going on a walk. I didn't say for how long. I didn't say anything. And honestly, she was probably like, I don't even know what her attachment style was. I'd have to think about that. That doesn't matter. But I just remember like being out there and like getting a text like, "Hey, are you ever coming back?" And it had been like 20 minutes. And I was like, I should have just said, I'm going to go for a half-hour walk. I'm going to clear my mind. Let's come back and talk about that. And it
Mm.
probably would have de-escalated the whole situation.
Sure. And that again, that takes the practice, right? That
Yeah.
takes because yes, that's a big part of the work that I've done is though I still will get reactive. I've done a lot of work around asking for the timeout or, like, okay, let's pause this before it is irreparable
Hmm.
and come back and do it again. Because that's a huge part of that when you both are explosive, saying and doing things. I mean,
You
when the
can't take them
toothpaste is
back.
out of the tube, that's rough.
Yeah. I think more than anything, what I've learned and probably more recently is that the words that I say actually have meaning, whether I'm upset, how I mean them, or how I don't mean them in the
Mm,
moment. And I try to, just in general, and you've seen it a few times here, as I'm trying to like find the right words to like talk about growing up, but also, like not diss the family. And like, listen, all of our families, like what they did right, they did the best they could. They didn't know any
sure.
better. And I think back to that, and I try to regulate myself, not using filler words, and slowly, carefully choose my words so that I'm talking about how I'm feeling and not projecting something onto someone else. Not always easy. I'm not always successful, but that's the mindset I try to take into it.
Yeah, and that's another great point when it comes to even like your intentions. Intentions don't always matter. Like
Yeah.
if what you said was hurtful and screwed up, no matter what you intended, it was still
Yeah.
hurtful and screwed up. So how do you think that all this work that you've done on attachment, relationships, how is that going to influence your future partner choice? I know that's probably a ways down the road, but how is that going to play a role in it?
I I don't have a full answer for you. Like I said, I'm a work in progress. But one thing I have learned, and I know I need to do, is I need to be open about things. I don't need to hide the fact that I have bad days. I don't need to hide the fact that sometimes I'm totally lost. I don't know. I don't need to hide the attachment style. I just need to explain, like, I'm learning about this. I'm learning about myself. I'm working on myself. And I know I have a tendency to do this. And I'm going to do my best to not be like that anymore. And then ask for the same thing back. Maybe they don't know their attachment style, and that's okay. But are they going to be able to articulate what triggers them, what upsets them, but then also, do the work and continue to work on themselves. I think it's so important for everyone as a human being to just always be working on yourself. You're never a finished product.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I work with my clients on frequently is something, and I've done a post about it as well, but there are 5 needs, there are 5 wants, and there are 5 boundaries when it comes to dating. So I won't make you go through 5 of all of them, but I would be interested if you could think of maybe 2 for the wants, needs, and boundaries. And the way that I describe this is the wants um, are things that well, I guess let's start with the needs. The needs are the non-negotiables. So
Yeah.
they have to happen. So for me, somebody has to be emotionally intelligent. They have to have a job. They have to be self-aware. Like those would be some of my needs. And the wants are, okay, well, my needs are met. What are some of my preferences?
Hmm.
So height or aesthetics or whatever that comes along with it. And then the boundaries, those are the deal breakers.
Yeah.
And so, whatever that might be of like, I will not be with somebody X, Y, and Z. What comes to mind, not to put you on
Yeah.
the complete spot with
No.
that?
So there's 3 things that I know I need in a relationship. I'll start there.
Okay.
These took time to figure out, and they're high level, but I can explain what I mean with each of them. Number one, I need trust, and that's not just trust that should come with any relationship. That you're not going to disrespect the relationship. You're not going to cheat. You're not going to partake in anything that disrespects a relationship, and know that I'm going to be the same way.
Mm.
That trust goes so far beyond a word. Like, it's just, I know wherever you are, whenever you're doing, you're being respectful of the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I define trust. The other one is one of my love language. They're actually, the next two are like love languages, which people have takes on those. I think there's learnings to take out of it, but um,
Absolutely.
I have two pretty close love languages. One of them is words of affirmation,
Mm.
but I don't need someone to really be like, Nick, you look so handsome. You're sort of like, I struggle internally so hard to try and do the right thing. And not just for me, but that's part of it, but for other people. So like
Mhm.
someone saying like, Nick, I think you're doing the right thing here, even if it's hard. I think you're
Yeah.
doing the right thing here. That means a lot to me. So I need quality time with that. I kind of bundle those together. I'm introverted. I don't always want to be out and about doing something social. Like, I like to play a game. I like to watch a movie. I like to cook together. Like, so I need those kind of things.
Mhm.
Really much like non-negotiable.
Okay. And I love that. I mean, the love languages, they really are, regardless of people's takes on them, they really are important. But I like how you specified that, because that's when I'm working with people on love languages, we always break it down in the way that you did, because you're right. Words of affirmation is a great example of that. For some people, it's, you look so attractive today. And for other people, I'm so proud of you. You work so hard on that. And
Hmm.
so it really is specific. And so I love how you've really defined that. So those are your needs. Was there
Hmm.
another need, or those are the,
I think, yeah, I think I named
those
them
are it?
all.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are a couple wants? So what are a couple preferences?
So some of the preferences are, you need to have your own hobbies. You need to
Mm,
be kind of like you, like self-aware that like the relationship isn't the end all be all.
yep.
Um, and I think that you have to, of course, like have emotional intelligence as well. I kind of lump all that together.
Sure.
Another one is I want someone that maybe they don't enjoy or care about the same things I care about or enjoy, but I want them to celebrate in my excitement around them with me. And I'm the same way. Like, there's things that I do that I don't really have any interest in doing, but I
Mhm.
know they matter to my partner. And if I see her enjoying something or having a good time doing something, like that brings me joy.
Okay.
So I really, maybe that should be a need. Like, I really want, maybe I really want someone that feels that way too and gets joy from my joy the way that I would get joy from their joy.
Yeah,
And
that
then
sounds like a need.
yeah, exactly. And then someone who likes to like, I like to move around a lot. Not
Mm,
houses, but like I like to go on walks. I go on a couple walks
mm.
a day. I like to just like wander around. I like to go without a plan, and maybe I get food, maybe I take a long walk, maybe I take a short walk. So someone that well, one wants me to do that on my own because that's the way that I regulate myself, but also someone that wants to just kind of bop around with me.
Yeah, yeah, you post a lot of that, like, in your stories and stuff. You're always out and about at the farmer's market or meals or
Yeah.
whatever the case. Yeah, that's that. I mean, that's a great one. It sounds like a lot of your needs and wants kind of mesh into like the idea of interdependence, right?
Hmm.
So you are you and they are them, and then you get to be a we, and you get to be excited for each other and rooting for each other, but also very aware of your own interests as well.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
So, boundaries, what comes to mind when you think of a couple? So, I mean, boundaries in a general sense, right? So these are more like the deal breaker of I just can't be in a relationship with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I can't be in a relationship with someone who um doesn't this is the highest of high, doesn't respect my boundaries.
Sure.
I don't, if someone is hurtful or mean-spirited, and that doesn't mean that you can't say things that hurt. Like, we all do it. We talked about it earlier. But like, I don't want someone who's mean-spirited.
Mm,
And then I don't want a person who is, I don't know how to say this the right way. So like, I don't want someone who isn't going to respect my space. to do things on my own because I'm introverted. So I like to write. I just got inspired about thinking today about, my inner peace, and it's, believe me, been challenged a lot. But it's something that I'm like, you know what? I have to stick to that. Like, I have to stay true to myself, stick, because that's when I'm calm. So like
Mm,
um, someone that doesn't contribute to that, but takes away from that.
right.
If you're the saying, if your glass is empty, you don't have any water to give anybody else. And then another boundary is I would like someone who can say like no,
Hmm.
no to me, no to other people, and really respect themselves and then respect the relationship in the sense of like sometimes, we need to put boundaries around the people that are asking too much of us as individuals and as a couple. And I think that's super important too.
Yeah, for sure. So somebody who is able to respect your boundaries but also set their own boundaries, and it sounds like
Exactly.
even with you that's a big deal, that they have the ability to do that. And I mean, yes, that's a really hard thing. Again, going back to upbringing, and for a lot of us with codependent tendencies, myself included, it is really hard for me to say no or to disappoint
Mhm.
or to not people please. And so that, yeah, somebody who has worked on that and is able to do it in spite of the discomfort.
Boundaries are the most important thing that I've learned in therapy over the last 6 years because I would let people take and take and take.
Mm,
And I'm an empathetic person. So like I feel the way people feel. I'm a product of my surroundings. And if
right.
it, you attract people that take. And so like I learned real early, like I got to put boundaries around certain family members. I got to put boundaries around certain friends. I don't need to pick up the phone every time someone calls. I don't need to reply to a text message the moment I see it.
Yeah.
It's not my responsibility to help regulate someone else. That doesn't mean I don't want to, but like those types of boundaries have changed my life, and they've really given me the space to make sure I can take care of myself.
Yeah, a great point. Even the texting thing, such a society of like, did you get my text? Like, I sent you a text, why didn't you reply? And it's that becomes an issue. The phone
Mhm.
calls, all of that, and that takes a lot of cognizance and practice and awareness to be able to do that, because especially for somebody with a lot of empathy, the fear is if
Mhm.
I set a boundary, they're going to think I'm mean, or they're going to be mad at me, or they're going to
Or
be
that you're
upset
doing it
at
to
me.
hurt them.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah.
boundary isn't to hurt someone; it's to protect someone. That's
Both of you,
the
right? To
Yeah,
protect
that's the
both
thing.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Are there any books that you would recommend that are specific to your relationship discovery and journey? Any interesting ones?
What have I got back? So I'll I'll I had Steph on my podcast. I'm reading Soul Broken right now, which is her guidebook to ambiguous grief, which
Mm,
is a, a type of grief where, if you think of it this way, the person is not who you believed they were or knew them as, and then they're still alive. So if you think of, like drug addicts, or you think of um, someone with dementia or somebody who, you know, is out there, but you could run into them, but it's not the person that you thought they were.
mm,
And the thing that I'm learning going through this book, and there's exercises in each chapter, and talking to Steph, and hearing her story about how she found out that her husband, whom she was very happy with, was not the person she thought he was. And I'm not
wow.
going to tell her story. She tells it on my podcast and throughout
Yeah.
her book. But she was going through this challenge of being like, I could, basically run into him in the grocery store, but like, I don't know this man. And, going through that process of sort of identifying like I'm feeling these certain kind of ways. I'm going through a divorce, and it sucks and it's hard, and hearing someone else's story that elements are relatable
Mm,
is very it's very comforting, and it's challenging me to sort of think about things in a different way,
mm.
but also giving you the space to sort of learn from it. And I think that's a great use of her experience and sharing that with the world.
For sure. I think one of the most powerful things that we can do in our journeys is have our perspectives challenged, that we can look at things in a different way through a different lens. And that just opens up a whole new world. Can be really, really empowering and really healing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where can people find you? On your social media or online? Where can you be found?
Yeah, you can find me. You can just Google these days, and I show up, which is crazy. But you can find me on Instagram. It's nthompson513, and that's where I do primarily share some content. You can also check out my podcast conversations with Nick Thompson, available on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. And that's where we're having those hopefully stigma removing types of conversations around health, mental health, holistic medicine, news and politics, the media, all of that.
Yes. And it is so interesting. I love your podcast and I love your Instagram as well. I love how you really vacillate between this is my everyday life and also here's some tips, here's some ideas on how you can show up differently.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I'm a normal dude. People get very surprised by that, I guess. So
I would agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick. I really, again, appreciate you being here. I appreciate you taking the time and I appreciate you being so vulnerable with all your insights around your journey. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to share my experience. I'm a work in progress, figuring it out, just like all of us.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you again to Nick Thompson for sharing his story with us today. And thank you all for listening to this first episode of Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. To get more relatable content, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on Instagram.